All right, so everybody good? Chris, you good? There you go, hands up. Today we're going to look at a video that I might actually end up posting on online and have it be like an ed puzzle, but I thought I'd go through it with you because this is a taste of what class is supposed to feel like, and it's been very difficult to do this year. I think if I recorded it might be more equitable. I should be able to share this with everybody. But I want to go through with you. I think shocks and struts are probably one of the more important things to focus in on when we're learning about suspension. And I know that this is auto basics, and essentially the content is also auto 1. So we're kind of bridging back and forth between the levels. Sometimes I stay real basic and we're just looking at parts ID, and then sometimes we get into the content and function a little bit more of the component. So today's that day. I'm going to turn the video on and you guys can start to watch. Everybody here okay? All right.
When it comes to the performance of an automobile, people usually think of horsepower or the cubic capacity of an engine. But all the power delivered to the powertrain could be wasted if not handled by an efficient suspension system. The shock absorber, also known as a damper, plays a vital role in the suspension system.
All right, so you guys recognized all those parts we just talked about, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to switch this around. Looks like it's going pretty well, so. All right, hopefully that'll work. What I want you to focus in on this part of the video is just identify all the components that are on the bench that we've been learning about, seeing on cars. How do they work together with each other, right? So it's kind of like a brother-sister family relationship when you're talking about control arm, ball joint, knuckle, ball joint, lower control arm, or strut. Everybody's connected, right? It's like that old saying, the knee bone is connected to the, well, femur, I guess, right? All right, let's keep going.
Not just for providing better comfort, but it also ensures consistent traction to the road surface, better steering stability, and also improves handling of the vehicle. Technically briefing, a shock absorber is nothing but a hydraulic pump which absorbs the kinetic energy of the suspension system and dissipates it into the atmosphere as heat. Shock absorbers found in most vehicles can be strut type or conventional telescopic type.
All right, so just a little note here. I know that in the past we keep saying that this is a what? I've called it a strut probably 100 times with y'all. It's actually, and it's on the parts list as a strut, right? Mm-hmm. It's actually called a McPherson strut because if you remember, we had cars that were heavy, and we got underneath that Olds Cutlass the other day. We saw the full frame matches what a truck has now. We just figured out, well, we need to lighten these cars up if we want to get better gas mileage. And so front-wheel drive was born, unibody construction was born, and a lot less frame was needed. But they had to figure out, how am I going to run, again, this is probably the third time we've covered this, but how am I going to run twisting force or torque to the wheel and then, get power to the road while there's a spring, as you saw on the Olds Cutlass, and a shock in the way. So the guy, McPherson, decided, let's move the spring and shock up. Does the same thing, and as you can see by the illustration where the video was going up, the wheel was going up and down, you can see it does exactly what the old style used to do. Now we can run a CV axle through that area that's capable of taking twisting force from the car, transmission and differential, and sending it out to the wheel. Okay.
Although the operating principles of both are almost the same. In this presentation, we're going to take a look at the strut type shock absorber, mostly found in the front suspension of an automobile. A strut type shock absorber is mounted between the body and the steering knuckle. With the steering knuckle connected to the lower arm,
please look at this and understand it. Like, I need you to know subframe, lower control arm, knuckle, right? Knuckle. Strut. Or on a truck, it would be an upper A arm with a spring over here or over here. It depends. Some trucks use a strut, my truck uses what? Remember? Hello? You don't remember the spring that's used on my truck?
Oh, leaf springs.
In the rear, and what in the front? Rhymes with torso. Torsion bar. Very good. So at this point, we're actually going from look at all these parts on a bench to how do they work together? How do they work at all? Like what's the function of each individual part if they were all laid on the ground and we discussed them? And how do they work, again, how do they work together? And then what are the different types that are used and why, right? So you wouldn't use a subframe with a strut on a truck. And I think some of you in this room could probably tell me why that's a bad idea. And you wouldn't use a leaf spring on the front as the type of spring for a suspension system. And I think some of you could probably begin to tell me why. This is the collection of your automotive suspension knowledge, right? And it starts here with understanding a lot of this stuff. And then we move to, well, how do we change out those parts when they're bad? How do we know when they're bad, right? So that's where we're at. This is a very important slide.
Change the wheel displacement only to be in the vertical direction. The steering knuckle is designed in such a manner that the wheel can be turned within the limited range.
What's this component right here? It's called an axle, okay? Just while we're here, I'm going to cover this, get a little advanced. This is more Auto 1-ish, but so this is a steel shaft that's splined, and splines are like, it's when they take the end of the shaft and they cut straight grooves in it, and then they take a female exact copy and they slide it on, and then the two are locked forever. Yes, they slide apart, but this rubber corrugated boot that has these sort of expanding pyramids, inside there is a tricky system of a cage with balls and a series of ball runners that are like water slides, and it can twist and turn. It's wicked. I mean, this invention is amazing. And then this one is called a plunging joint, because all it does is a tripod. You might even be able to see 1, 2, 3, a tripod of steel circles that are in a sliding channel. So 1, 2, 3, and they can pass rotational motion or torque while the shaft goes down and up as the suspension moves, causing this to slide out and back in. So because when you go down and the suspension falls into a pit hole, what am I thinking of? A pothole, the CV axle has to get longer because it just did this, right? So inside the plunging joint, it has the ability to move forward and backward and still continue to twist and put power into that shaft, which puts power into that joint, which puts power into the wheel, because the splining I talked about earlier is happening in the hub. So you remember the hub on the bench out there? A front-wheel drive hub is splined on the inside. So the CV axle, the part you can't see that has a stub shaft that goes that way, splines into the hub, and then whatever the CV axle does, the hub is doing, because they're splined forever, right? I've never seen one of these break anywhere but right at that joint right there and right at that joint right there. Those are the weak spots. You're never going to see one of these shafts break or the splines on the tip axle, okay? These are called drive axles. They're also called drive shafts, and they're also called CV axles. That's Charlie Victor, right? CV stands for constant velocity, meaning that it's capable of transferring velocity constantly, right? So we just kind of hit Auto 1 and maybe stepped a little into Auto 2 and then came back. Just a lot of information. That's not a real basic, that's not an Auto Basics conversation we just had. So if you feel like your brain's full or you're getting tired, it's probably because there's a lot of information coming your way. All right, here we go.
By the steering rack assembly.
Oh, by the way, how many people have seen the ball joints video that I posted? Goss's Garage? He's good. It's pretty good. I mean, for somebody, I don't want to do a video, right? I don't have time, right? And this guy is talking about it, and you get the point, right? You understand what a ball joint probably is and how it differs from a strut. So just so you know, there's a ball joint wherever we need to connect a control arm to a knuckle, there has to be a ball joint, because it has to be able to move up and down, and the angle right here is not going to stay right angle forever. It's going to do a lot of this. So it has to pivot, and it also has to turn when you turn left and right. So when this turns and goes up and down at the same time, ball joint is taking care of all that. High wear component. This is where your money is at, right there. You're going to replace more ball joints than any other component. And it's a ball socket arrangement where you have this giant, well, you've seen them on the bench. You have this giant cup, and it surrounds a steel ball that's on a shaft, and that thing can move around like that. Imagine what's happening in there, right? And when the grease runs out over time, 100,000 miles or 10 years, yeah, it wears out, and all of a sudden you've got some wear in there. Now it's the same as when you have a hip socket problem and someone has their hip replaced. It's ball socket arrangement. Femur bone comes up into one of these, right? And so when you step on it and it goes kunk, and there's nerve endings in the way, that hurts like hell. So it's the same arrangement though. Any questions? All right.
A strut assembly comprises a shock absorber, coilover spring, top strut mount, and a dust boot over the piston rod to prevent any contamination to the oil seals. Despite the popular belief, it's the coilover that does take the weight of the vehicle and not the shock absorber.
Boom! Fun fact. Springs control the weight of the car. They handle the weight of the car. Nothing else. Okay? I need you to put that so far in your brain that it sprouts like a small seed and then begins to blossom when spring comes. Okay? The springs hold the whole car. So when the car, you ever seen a car that's sagging one side, the other, or back and front? It's the springs. People think, oh, I need to get new struts or shock absorber. No. The only thing a shock absorber or a strut does is limit this travel. That's it. It doesn't push up and say, I've got this. That's what the spring does. So if you see a truck and it's doing this and it's not supposed to, it's either got too much weight in the back or the springs are worn out. If you see a car going on the road and it's all tipped on one side, it's either got too much weight on one side, or if it's empty, then the springs are worn out. Okay? You need new springs, yeah.
So, with cars like that have the hydraulics, the spring brake can go up.
Pull this down, I can't hear you.
No, I was gonna ask that too. You said that the cars with hydraulics?
Yeah.
So like, I was like,
So you take the spring and strut out, and you put hydraulic rams. Hydraulics literally means liquid. Okay, you can put a car on airbags, but it's like, or you can barely see the movement. The cool thing about airbags is that you can drop a car down at will. And I have a friend who has a beautiful BMW who she put airbags on this thing, and it's remote control with her phone. And she can drop that thing so low that you can't move the car. It's a security system, right? Looks cool too, but hydraulics, it's like a shock with a motor and a line coming from that motor that pumps fluid here and shoves it in here, and there's a piston, and it can go up like boom, like choop. You can move a foot of vertical travel from this rod that we're about to check out. Yeah.
With hydraulics, is there still springs or no?
Springs?
Yeah, like those.
You have to have some form of spring. Let's watch a video on hydraulics after this.
Alright.
Yeah. All right.
I was thinking it was
The strut housing includes a piston rod, which moves up and down, a rebound stopper, a piston valve unit, a base valve unit, and the hydraulic fluid. The shock absorber is designed to have a working chamber and a reserve chamber. The hydraulic fluid transfer between these chambers is controlled by the base compression valve. Such a configuration using two chambers is known as a twin-tube shock absorber, although other variants such as the monotube shock absorber, which uses a single chamber, are also present in the industry. For the shock absorber to provide its optimum performance, the working chamber must be full of fluid at all times. The purpose of the reserve chamber is to ensure that the working chamber is filled with fluid, regardless of how compressed the piston is. Thus, the reserve chamber will always be partially filled. The system is added with liquid nitrogen while manufacturing, which expands and acts as a compressed gas on the remaining volume of the reserve chamber.
All right, so he's about to say this, but I just wanted to steal his thunder a little bit because he's a computer and I'm not. They add liquid nitrogen here to push down here on the fluid. And when you push on fluid, it does not compress, but it can raise the pressure in this area, okay? In other words, it doesn't get smaller. Like air you can compress. You can take a closet full of air and put it in a dive tank. If you ever see a diver carrying around a tank on his back, that's generically that's about a closet, a Coke closet full of air. Okay, how did he get it all so small? You can compress the gas. You cannot compress a liquid of any kind on this planet. It's physics, okay? But you can put pressure against liquid and cause it to be under pressure. When you do that to a shock, it keeps it from aerating. Aeration is what happens to a motorboat behind the boat. You see that white water? Okay, or when you go like this really fast and you see bubbles and stuff like that in the water, it's aeration. You took some air out of the water, or you added air from up here that was above the water into the water. When this experiences aeration, it cuts right through the air and bottoms out really fast because air doesn't slow down a ram like that, but liquid does. So aeration is bad. That's why they put nitrogen in there to pressurize the fluid and raise the level it would take to get to create aeration or even boiling. Good. Learning so much today. Oops, sorry.
The calibrated valve at the base controls the resistance experienced by the piston during the compression phase, while the fluid flows almost freely from base to top through the piston valve. As the piston moves towards the base, the compression valve opens in a controlled manner, allowing the excess fluid to flow to the reserve chamber. During the rebound phase, the piston rod tries to restore its position against the compressive energy, and the rebound valve ensures this happens in a controlled manner. As a result, the previously displaced fluid to the reserve chamber is pulled back to the working chamber. The repeating action absorbs the energy from the suspension system and transfers its heat to the atmosphere. With the pressurized gas added into the reserve chamber, the system avoids the phenomenon of generating air bubbles in the fluid, known as cavitation or foaming. Damage to the oil seal can cause fluid leaks, resulting in foaming and inconsistent shock absorber performance.
So there's your first lesson in diagnosing a shock. When that seal on top, shock or strut, goes bad, you'll see leakage coming out and running down. If you see a shock and you see liquid dripping out of it like it's bleeding, right? Gravity will pull it all the way down here, so you're going to get your drip down here. And you check it out and you realize that's shock fluid, not engine oil, because sometimes things that are near it can leak on it, and that's not, you have to be able to decipher, is this engine oil or is this shock fluid? And that's easy to do because I want you to start smelling every fluid, and this stuff stinks pretty bad. All right, so once you're at a point where you're looking at a shock, the first thing you're going to do is check it for jounce and rebound, and I'm going to show you that out there, and then you're going to check it for leaks. Okay, those are the two really important tests you can do to your shocks and struts. The other one is just looking at, Chris, focus, stand up. The other one is just look at the mileage of the car, right? If your customer comes in, or your mom, or whoever if it's your wife, or maybe it's just a buddy, if you're giving someone advice about their car, you're the professional now, okay? You're the doctor. If a car has 100, if you get a Mazda 323 in here, or a Mazda 6 or something like that, and it's got 110,000 miles and it's never had struts done, guess what? It needs struts. And you don't do one, you do either two, either the right front and the left front, or you do four. Yeah, and I recommend four, because anytime you've got something that controls the up and down movement of the wheel, and you've got two in the back that are old, and they're kind of doing some of this, and the ones up front are new, and they're kind of doing this, you're going to get your car doing some weird stuff, and that could be dangerous for the customer. Okay? So go for four. Get that fourth finger up there. And that goes for everything suspension related. If you're going to do something to the left, try to do it to the right. Brakes, too. Okay, left and right. You don't do one brake caliper. That's not good. I mean, I've seen a lot of people do that, but it's not safe. As long as you're the one that's not on the work order, and they can't come back and sue you.
Shock absorbers can usually last up to several thousand miles, but they do get defective over time due to the millions of operation cycles they have to endure. Defective shock absorbers could cause the steering system to rattle, providing an unpleasant driving experience. A torn oil seal can cause the hydraulic fluid to leak, resulting in a poor shock absorber performance. Uncontrolled piston movement due to worn valves or seals can affect the traction to the road surface, resulting in increased braking distance. With worn shock absorbers, the steering system could swerve your vehicle hard off the road, even with the slightest movements.
True.
A worn rubber insulator inside a shock absorber mount could create a clunking noise when you drive over uneven surfaces. Uneven tire wear could occur due to a bad shock absorber, which leads to a shorter lifespan for the tires. A failing shock absorber is best inspected at the earliest and should be replaced as required for the efficient.
All right, so that's the video. Let me quickly turn this off and